Delaware may be small, but its history hides deep mysteries, from ancient native sites buried in marshlands to ghostly forts, vanished sea creatures, and strange legends along its quiet shores. Beneath the calm of this coastal state lies a past filled with unexplained discoveries and stories that still haunt its rivers, forests, and forgotten islands. Selbyville Swamp Monster. Down in the thick, tangled wetlands near Selbyville, Delaware, there's a stretch of wilderness that people once avoided after dark. The locals call it the Great Cypress Swamp, a deep, misty maze of water and trees that feels cut off from the modern world. And for nearly a century, stories have whispered through this place about something that lives inside it. Some say it's an ape-like beast covered in mud and moss. Others claim it's a ghostly figure that screams at night. Around here, it's known simply as the Selbyville Swamp Monster. The legend started back in the 1920s when a local newspaper in Selbyville ran a short piece about hunters who'd seen a strange creature in the swamp. They described it as tall, broad-shouldered, and walking upright, like a man, but not quite human. It had glowing eyes and left huge footprints in the mud. At the time, people were still clearing parts of the swamp for logging, so the story spread quickly through nearby towns. Some believed it was a remnant of an ancient species. Others thought it was the spirit of someone lost in the bog centuries earlier. But the fear it stirred was real enough that for years, few dared to venture deep into the swamp alone. Then in the 1960s, the story took a twist. A man named Fred Stevens, who wrote for a local paper, admitted that he and a friend had actually dressed up as the monster as a prank. They used fur, rags, and even attached a fake head to make the illusion more terrifying. They would hide in the fog, let out low growls, and scare anyone who came too close. The hoax was supposed to be harmless fun, but it quickly grew beyond their control. Sightings started pouring in, people who swore they saw the creature even when Fred wasn't around. That's when things got strange. The prank had ended, but the sightings didn't stop. Some locals began to insist that whatever was out there wasn't human at all. Hunters reported hearing heavy footsteps and guttural sounds in the distance. Fishermen said they'd seen something moving through the cypress shadows, taller than any man, moving fast through waist-deep water. A few stories described the creature dragging itself onto dry land at night, leaving behind long claw marks on tree trunks. One man, decades later, said he'd seen glowing red eyes through the trees near his truck headlights. Whatever he saw, he swore it wasn't a man in costume. That mix of fact and folklore is what keeps the Selbyville Swamp Monster alive. Some think it's Delaware's version of Bigfoot. Others say it's just the swamp playing tricks, a combination of fog, shadows, and animal sounds that blend into something haunting. The Great Cypress Swamp itself adds to the mystery. It's one of the largest forested wetlands on the Delmarva Peninsula, stretching across thousands of acres. Parts of it are nearly impassable, with black water reflecting the trees like a mirror and thick mats of vines hanging overhead. It's the kind of place where sounds echo strangely, and the line between reality and imagination blurs. When you walk through the swamp, especially at dusk, it's easy to see how the legend stuck. The air feels heavy, almost electric. Frogs croak in the distance, and the hum of insects fills every corner. The smell of wet earth mixes with the sharp scent of pine and cypress. Every movement in the brush makes you glance over your shoulder. There's something primal about it, something that stirs old instincts. Even knowing the story started as a prank, part of you still expects something to step out of the fog. Over the years, researchers and cryptozoologists have tried to investigate. Some brought cameras and sound equipment. Others came with thermal imaging tools. They recorded strange noises, low, moaning calls that didn't match any known animal in the area. A few blurry photos appeared in local papers, but none offered real proof. Most of what we have are eyewitness accounts passed down like campfire tales. That's part of what makes it compelling. The line between legend and reality is so thin here that even skeptics end up wondering what might still be hiding in the dark corners of the swamp. What's interesting is that the Great Cypress Swamp has its own history beyond the monster. It once covered more than 50,000 acres before fires and drainage projects reduced it. For centuries, people harvested cypress trees here for shipbuilding and shingles. It was also a hiding place. Runaway slaves and outlaws were said to take refuge in its depths, where no one dared follow. So the land itself has always carried a sense of secrecy and danger. The Selbyville Swamp Monster just became the latest spirit to inhabit that space. Today, much of the swamp is owned by the Nature Conservancy, which protects it as a natural preserve. The land is slowly healing, but it's still wild and uneasy. The ground squelches underfoot, and even with modern trails nearby, large parts remain untouched. Locals say that on certain foggy nights, you can still hear strange noises echoing through the trees. Whether it's a bird, a bobcat, or something else, no one can say for sure. But the stories haven't died. If anything, they've grown into part of the town's identity. Some small businesses even use the monster as a mascot. And during Halloween, you'll sometimes find decorations shaped like the creature watching from porches and shop windows. There are positives to the site's condition today. The Great Cypress Swamp has regained much of its natural beauty. The trees are thriving again, and wildlife from herons to foxes has returned. It's one of the most biodiverse areas in the state. The monster legend, in a way, helps preserve it. People are curious but also cautious, which keeps most visitors respectful of the land. The folklore keeps eyes on the area, ensuring it doesn't get completely forgotten. The negatives, though, are still there. The swamp is shrinking in some parts because of climate change and encroaching development. Rising sea levels bring saltwater intrusion that kills off some of the older cypress trees. Fires remain a danger, especially during dry summers, and while the monster story brings attention, it also brings a few careless thrill seekers who wander off trails or litter while chasing ghosts. The balance between curiosity and conservation is fragile, and the swamp seems always on the edge of reclaiming itself. From a neutral standpoint, I think the Selbyville swamp monster is one of those stories that tells us more about people than about creatures. It's a reflection of how we react to the unknown. The first prank started as a joke, but it tapped into something deeper, our fascination with what might still be wild and undiscovered. Even if the monster was a man in a costume, the fear and wonder it inspired were real. Maybe that's the point. We create legends to fill the spaces where our understanding fades, and sometimes those legends take on a life of their own. If you visit Selbyville today, you can still find locals who will tell you about late-night screams or shadows moving through the mist. Most will smile when they tell the story, but a few will swear it's all true. And when you drive past the edge of the swamp after sunset, with fog curling low across the road, and the silhouettes of cypress trees rising like skeletons, you might start to believe them. The place has a way of getting under your skin. It's quiet, eerie, and beautiful all at once. A reminder that even in a small state like Delaware, mystery can still thrive in the spaces where light and shadow meet. The Great Cypress Swamp today stands as both a natural refuge and a monument to one of the state's oldest legends. The trails are open, the air is thick with the scent of pine and saltwater, and at night the frogs and crickets carry on their endless chorus. But sometimes, when the wind shifts and the mist rolls in, it's easy to imagine that something ancient still stirs out there in the darkness, watching, waiting, and reminding us that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Phantom ship of the Delaware Bay. Sailors have always been a superstitious bunch, and for good reason. The sea can play tricks on your mind. But off the coast of Delaware, there's one story that's endured for over 200 years, passed down from fishermen, lighthouse keepers, and ship captains alike. They all speak of the same chilling sight, a glowing ship that appears out on Delaware Bay, drifting silently through the mist before vanishing without a trace. They call it the Phantom ship of the Delaware Bay. The first written accounts date back to the 1700s, when the waters near Cape Henlopen were among the busiest shipping routes in the colonies. One of the earliest stories tells of a British merchant vessel said to have caught fire during a fierce storm and gone down with all hands aboard. According to legend, it happened so quickly that no distress signal was ever sent. For days after, wreckage washed ashore, along with bits of charred wood that still smelled of smoke. But when the sea finally calmed, people began to see something strange, a fiery silhouette of a ship gliding through the bay at night. Witnesses described it in eerily similar ways: tall masts wrapped in red flame, sails glowing like embers, and figures moving across the deck though the ship made no sound. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it would fade into the fog or sink beneath the waves. Some claimed they could even hear faint screams or the crackle of fire. The most famous sighting came in 1880, when a crew on a pilot boat swore they saw a three-masted ship ablaze in the middle of the bay. Thinking it was a real emergency, they rowed toward it. But as they closed in, the flames dimmed, the ship turned ghostly white, and then it vanished completely, leaving calm water behind. Not even a ripple. The next morning, no wreckage was found. The lighthouse keepers at Cape Henlopen backed up their story. They had seen it too. Ever since then, the Phantom ship has been spotted during bad weather, especially before a big storm or heavy fog. Old-timers along the coast used to say that when the ghost ship appears, disaster follows. Some fishermen even refused to go out to sea if someone claimed to have seen its light the night before. It became both an omen and a reminder of how merciless the bay could be. There are a few theories about what causes the phenomenon. Some scientists suggest it could be a kind of optical illusion called a fata morgana. That's when layers of warm and cold air bend light over the horizon, making distant ships appear distorted or glowing. Others point to swamp gas or reflections from lighthouses. But the people who've seen the phantom ship up close swear it's more than that. They say no mirage can make you feel the heat of a fire that isn't there, or hear the crackling of invisible flames. There's also a more symbolic interpretation. Some locals believe the ghost ship represents all the lives lost in the bay over centuries, fishermen, sailors, and travelers who never made it home. Delaware Bay has a long history of shipwrecks. Strong currents, sudden squalls, and hidden sandbars made it treacherous even for experienced crews. Hundreds of ships have sunk there, and some were never recovered. It's easy to imagine those restless souls drifting back through the fog, trapped in the scene of their final moments. In the early 1900s, the legend took on a life of its own. Newspapers ran stories about the flaming ship of Lewes, and locals even organized watch parties, hoping to catch a glimpse. One night, a group claimed they saw a faint glow out on the horizon. Some thought it was the ghost ship, others believed it was a cargo vessel lit by the moon. Arguments broke out, and by morning, no one could agree on what they had seen. That's how the legend works. It stays just beyond reach, never proven, but never disproven either. The phantom ship has been tied to real wrecks too. Some believe it's the ghost of the Palatine, though that ship actually burned near Block Island, Rhode Island. Others say it's the Devil's Claw, a mysterious brig rumored to have smuggled gold before sinking in a storm. There's no record confirming either story, but both add weight to the folklore, the sense that something tragic and unfinished lingers just beneath the surface. When you stand on the shoreline near Lewes or Cape Henlopen at night, it's not hard to understand how such a legend endures. The water looks endless, the horizon fades into darkness, and the fog can roll in so thick you can barely see a few feet ahead. The sound of the waves and wind blend together into something that feels alive. If a faint light flickered out there in the mist, your mind would fill in the rest: a ship, a fire, maybe even faces moving through the glow. Today, the story of the phantom ship is still part of Delaware's coastal culture. Locals mention it with a mix of pride and unease. Fishermen tell the story to visitors, and ghost tours in Lewes included on their list of local hauntings. A few paranormal enthusiasts have tried to document it, setting up cameras along the bay, but no one's captured anything more than fog and distant lights. That's part of its power. It remains a mystery you can't quite touch. There's something poetic about the idea of a burning ghost ship that never goes out. It's both terrifying and beautiful, like a warning and a memory at once. Maybe it's just light bending over the water, or maybe it's something deeper, something about the sea's ability to hold on to stories, refusing to let them die. I've stood on that coast myself, just before dawn, when the air smells like salt and the fog curls low to the ground. The lighthouse beam sweeps across the water, and for a second, you can almost imagine seeing movement out there, a flicker, a glow that disappears when you blink. You tell yourself it's a trick of the light, but part of you wonders, and that's what keeps the legend alive. As for the present-day site, Delaware Bay is busier than ever, dotted with cargo ships, ferries, and fishing boats. Cape Henlopen State Park nearby is clean, peaceful, and popular with hikers and birdwatchers. The positives are clear: it's well-maintained and open to the public. But the negatives are the same ones that haunt most coastal places now: erosion, pollution, and light from modern cities dimming the stars that once guided sailors. Still, when the fog rolls in thick and the waves slap against the rocks, that old atmosphere returns. You can almost hear the past whispering through the mist, and if you look long enough into the gray distance, you might just glimpse the phantom ship of Delaware Bay drifting by, silent, timeless, and burning with the memory of its own end. Thompson's Island Site. If you drive just outside Rehoboth Beach, there's a quiet stretch of land surrounded by tidal creeks and thick marsh grass. It doesn't look like much at first glance, just a small wooded rise called Thompson's Island. But beneath that soft soil lies one of Delaware's oldest mysteries. Archaeologists say people began living here more than 5,000 years ago. They built fires, shaped stone tools, and buried their dead in ways that still puzzle researchers. When you walk the narrow trail that circles the site today, you can feel that deep human presence, even though the land seems calm and empty. Excavations over the years revealed layers of ancient life, traces of camps built by people who came back season after season. They hunted along the inland bays, fished the shallow waters, and gathered shellfish from the tidal flats. Some artifacts show trade materials that came from far away, suggesting these weren't isolated groups. They were part of a broad network that stretched across what we now call the Mid-Atlantic. Yet no one really knows who they were. Their names are gone, their language is lost, only their tools, broken pottery, and the shapes of their fire pits remain to tell the story. What makes Thompson's Island so mysterious is how deliberately it seems to have been used. Unlike many open camps, this place has evidence of repeated, purposeful visits. Archaeologists found post holes that hint at temporary shelters, and fragments of carved stones that might have been ritual objects. Some believe the island held spiritual importance. Its position, slightly higher than the surrounding marsh, would have made it a kind of natural stage between land and water, a threshold place. To ancient people, that boundary might have symbolized the link between the human world and the spirit world. It's the kind of idea that makes you stop and look around differently, seeing not just trees and grass, but a place that once carried meaning we can barely imagine. The earliest traces date back to around 3000 BC, during what archaeologists call the Archaic period. Over the centuries, new groups returned. By the Woodland period, maybe 1,000 years before European contact, the people here were using pottery and forming more organized communities. They cooked fish and shellfish in clay vessels, and their diet tied them closely to the water. What's striking is how little evidence there is of permanent housing. This wasn't a village that stayed in one spot year-round. It was a base camp, a seasonal home that drew families back generation after generation. They came for the harvest of the bay, and maybe for something spiritual that made this island more than just another good fishing spot. There are theories, of course. Some suggest that the island served as a meeting ground for trade between inland and coastal groups. Others think it was a sacred burial site, though very few human remains have been found. One unusual detail is the discovery of exotic stone materials, jasper, chert, and quartzite, that don't occur naturally nearby. Someone brought them here from far away. That hints at connection, at movement, at stories that once crossed hundreds of miles. It also raises the question, why choose this specific island, when there were plenty of other dry spots along the coast? The answer might lie in something we can't measure, a tradition, a legend, or even just the comfort of returning to a known place. Standing there today, you can see how fragile it all is. The island sits near a modern golf course, and development has pressed in on every side. Erosion eats at the banks, rising tides nibble away at what's left of the ancient soil. The archaeological team that excavated here in the late 20th century had to work carefully before the water reclaimed more of the site. Some of the most important finds are now in storage or on display at the State Museum in Dover, but the land itself is slowly being reshaped by nature. You can walk there on a public trail, but signs remind visitors not to dig or disturb anything. It's protected now, at least officially, though that protection can only do so much against time and tide. What's remarkable is how ordinary it looks. You'd never guess you're standing on a place that predates the pyramids of Egypt. There are no monuments, no stone circles, just uneven ground covered with pine needles and sandy soil. Yet somewhere beneath your feet are fire pits blackened by hands that worked here 5 millennia ago. That contrast, the quiet surface and the deep history underneath, is what makes Thompson's Island feel strange in a beautiful way. It's humbling. You realize that history isn't just written in ruins or temples. Sometimes it's hidden in a patch of woods between a housing development and a bay. Researchers continue to debate what the pattern of artifacts really means. Some think the changing styles of pottery and tools show how different cultures replaced or absorbed each other over time. Others believe the same people simply adapted, shifting their ways of life as the environment changed. Sea levels were rising then too, flooding older settlements and creating new coastlines. It's possible Thompson's Island wasn't even an island in its earliest days. It might have been part of a larger peninsula, gradually cut off as the bays formed. If that's true, what we now call an island could have been a high ridge overlooking a wide plain. Time and water transformed it, just as they transformed the people who came here. When you think about it, there's something poetic in that cycle. A site that once stood at the center of life is now eroding into the water it depended on. It's as if the land itself is finishing the story, closing the circle. Some locals say the island has an atmosphere that's hard to describe, calm but heavy, like it remembers. Maybe that's imagination, or maybe it's just the effect of standing where thousands of lives have passed. Either way, it's a feeling you don't forget. There's also an uncomfortable truth about sites like this. We know so little because early collectors often took artifacts without records. Arrowheads and pottery pieces ended up in private hands or were lost entirely. What remains for scientists to study is only part of the picture. It's possible the most telling clues were carried away long ago. Still, even fragments can speak. The pattern of hearths and refuse pits shows a community organized enough to manage resources and return systematically. That suggests knowledge passed down carefully through generations. These weren't primitive wanderers. They understood the land in a way that modern people rarely do. If you visit now, you'll find a sign explaining that the Thompsons Island site is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. There's a short trail loop where you can hear gulls and the faint hum of traffic from Route 1. The air smells like salt and pine. It's quiet except for wind and the occasional splash from the marsh. The positives are clear. It's preserved, accessible, and still offers a chance to connect with something ancient. The negatives are just as real: encroaching development, erosion, and indifference from people who pass by without knowing what lies underfoot. In a way, that tension mirrors the larger story of history everywhere, what we choose to remember and what we allow to fade. My own impression is mixed. Part of me wants the place to stay untouched, left to nature and memory. Another part wishes more people could experience it deeply, to understand how far back Delaware's human story goes. I think the mystery is valuable, not because we'll ever solve it, but because it reminds us how long people have been here, shaping the same ground we walk on. Thompsons Island may not have the fame of Stonehenge or Machu Picchu, but its quiet endurance speaks just as powerfully. Today, the site sits in a strange balance between protection and decay. The Delaware Seashore State Park manages it, but storms keep washing new layers of soil away. Sometimes, after a heavy rain, small shards appear on the surface, chips of stone, flakes of pottery, then vanish again into the sand. Each one is a whisper from a life that once moved through these trees. If you visit respectfully, you can almost sense their presence, not as ghosts, but as echoes of human persistence. Standing there at sunset, with the light turning gold over the marshes, you realize that mystery doesn't always need to be solved. Sometimes it just needs to be felt. Lewes Merman. Back in the late 1800s, the quiet coastal town of Lewes, Delaware, wasn't known for much beyond its fishing docks, salt marshes, and a few tall tales told by sailors who'd had too much rum. But in 1884, something washed up on its shores that would leave locals shaken and curious for generations. A strange, half-human, half-fish creature that came to be known as the Lewes Merman. The story starts when a violent storm hit the Delaware coast, the kind that churns the sea into a gray foaming wall. The morning after, beachcombers walking near the breakwater stumbled on a corpse tangled in seaweed. What they saw was grotesque and mesmerizing at the same time: a humanoid figure with scaled skin, webbed hands, and a long fish-like tail tapering from the waist down. The head was said to have human features, sunken eyes, a small nose, even teeth, but with patches of slick scales running up the neck. Word spread fast. The body was taken into town, where fishermen, children, and tourists lined up to see it. The local papers picked up the story, describing it as a marine curiosity. Some said it was just a decayed monkey sewn to a fish body, a type of Fiji mermaid sideshow trick popular in traveling circuses of the time. Others swore it was genuine, that it smelled like brine, that its bones didn't look human or fish-like, and that no stitch marks could be found. Soon after, a man named Captain Samuel M. Tucker displayed it in a local shop window for several days, charging a few cents per look. People came from miles away, farmers, merchants, even scholars, to see the creature that looked like something out of mythology. For some, it was proof that sailors' stories of mermaids weren't just fantasy. For others, it was a disturbing prank made to exploit local superstition. After a few weeks, the merman vanished from display. Some said Tucker sold it to a traveling circus for profit. Others claimed it decomposed too quickly and had to be buried near the dunes. There were even rumors that it was taken by men from the Smithsonian, who allegedly wanted to study it. Whatever happened, no solid evidence of the Lewes Merman has surfaced since. Only grainy newspaper clippings and second-hand sketches remain. Still, the story stuck around. Every few decades, it surfaces again in Delaware folklore. Locals retell it to new generations, and tourists come asking if the Lewes Merman is real. It's a kind of hometown legend, half joke, half warning of the sea's mysteries. There's an eerie detail in some of the old accounts that people rarely mention. A few fishermen claim that before the storm, the same one that brought the creature ashore, they'd heard strange wailing sounds near the water, almost like a woman's cry carried by the wind. After the discovery, that sound was never heard again. It's the kind of story you shrug off during the day but can't forget when you're standing alone by the shore at night. Over the years, attempts have been made to track down what the merman really was. Some skeptics argue it was likely a hoax modeled after the famous Fiji mermaids displayed by P.T. Barnum, those grotesque taxidermy creations made by stitching a monkey torso onto a fishtail. At the time, these were popular oddities, and Delaware wasn't immune to the traveling show culture sweeping America. It's possible someone simply wanted attention or profit after the storm, but others note that the Lewes Merman wasn't described as dried or obviously fake. Witnesses said it was fresh, damp, and decaying, as though it had truly come from the sea. That detail doesn't fit the usual circus prop explanation. Even modern marine biologists who've looked into the legend admit that unusual carcasses sometimes wash up along the mid-Atlantic coast, creatures so decayed they look unrecognizable. There's a phenomenon called a globster, where decomposed sea animals lose their defining features, often mistaken for sea monsters. Could that be what people saw in Lewes? There's also a local theory that ties the merman to Delaware's native folklore. The Lenape people once told stories about sea people who lived beneath the waves and sometimes visited the shores. They weren't friendly or hostile, just mysterious. Some anthropologists have speculated that the Lewes Merman legend might have blended these old stories with a real washed-up animal, creating a perfect storm of belief and imagination. If you visit Lewes today, it's a peaceful seaside town with clean beaches, seafood restaurants, and a small historical district that preserves its colonial past. There's no official marker or museum display for the Lewes Merman, just a few locals who'll tell you where they think it was found, somewhere near the old breakwater. Some older fishermen still recall their grandfathers talking about the seaman that came ashore. There's a faint sense that Lew doesn't want to lose the story completely. It's part of its identity now, a weird little corner of maritime mystery. During summer, you'll find gift shops selling mermaid trinkets and postcards with playful nods to the legend, most treated as folklore. But beneath the humor, there's a quiet curiosity that lingers. When you stand on the beach at dawn, the waves crash with a slow rhythm, gulls circle overhead, and the smell of salt hangs heavy in the air. It's not hard to imagine what it must have felt like that morning in 1884, finding something unknown, something that didn't fit any category of life you'd ever seen. The fear and wonder must have been equally strong. I've walked those beaches myself, and while there's no sign of any merman now, the feeling of mystery hasn't gone anywhere. The ocean hides its secrets well. Maybe the body was fake, maybe it was a misunderstood creature, or maybe the people of Lewes really did see something they couldn't explain, something that came from a part of the sea we still don't fully understand. Today, Lewes thrives as one of Delaware's most charming coastal towns, with well-kept boardwalks, lively summer crowds, and a proud connection to its seafaring past. But its beaches still have that quiet, haunting beauty, especially at dusk when the tide rolls in. The positives are clear. It's peaceful, family-friendly, and rich with history. But on the flip side, tourism has grown so much that some of that old isolation, that eerie sense of being on the edge of the wild Atlantic, has faded. The mystery feels quieter now, buried under modern comforts. Still, every time a storm sweeps through and the ocean surges higher than usual, people half joke about what might wash up next. They might not believe in the Lewes Merman anymore, but they haven't forgotten him either. That strange, sea-worn figure from the past still drifts through the town's imagination, part hoax, part legend, and maybe, just maybe, part truth. Fort Delaware Ghosts. If you ever visit Peary Patch Island on the Delaware River, Fort Delaware doesn't look particularly terrifying at first glance. The massive stone fortress rises out of the marsh, surrounded by calm water and quiet reeds. But once you step inside those heavy, echoing corridors, the temperature seems to drop. The air feels heavy, as if the place remembers things it shouldn't. For more than a century, locals, visitors, and even park rangers have sworn that this old Civil War fort is one of the most haunted spots on the East Coast. Fort Delaware was built in the mid-1800s, part of a chain of coastal defenses meant to protect the ports of Philadelphia and Wilmington. During the Civil War, it took on a darker role, turning into a Union prison for Confederate soldiers. Over 30,000 men were held there during the war's peak, crammed into wooden barracks behind the thick granite walls. Disease, hunger, and isolation ran rampant. By the time the war ended, nearly 3,000 prisoners had died there. Their bodies were buried across the river on a small island cemetery that has long since eroded away. When you learn that, the hauntings start to make a lot more sense. One of the most common reports comes from visitors walking near the old kitchen area. People say they smell pipe smoke, even though smoking isn't allowed anywhere inside. Some claim to see a man in a gray uniform sitting on a bench, staring blankly at the wall. Others have heard faint coughing or boots shuffling on the stone floors, only to find no one there. Rangers have gotten used to hearing footsteps in empty hallways or the metallic clang of a door that isn't really moving. There's also the story of the woman in white, a ghost often seen near the officers' quarters. She's described as wearing a long, old-fashioned dress, her hair pinned back neatly. Some believe she's the spirit of a Union nurse who tended to prisoners during outbreaks of smallpox and dysentery. Others think she might have been the wife of an officer who died there, still wandering the halls searching for him. Whatever her story is, she seems to appear most often to people visiting alone, always vanishing before they can take a picture. Modern paranormal investigators have spent nights at Fort Delaware using thermal cameras, motion sensors, and voice recorders. Several groups claim to have captured whispers, temperature drops, and even shadowy figures moving in the dark. A few of these clips made it onto national television, especially after the fort was featured on the show Ghost Hunters. That episode gave Fort Delaware a reputation that hasn't faded since. Yet even without ghost shows or gadgets, it's easy to understand why the fort unnerves people. The architecture itself feels designed to amplify sound. The curved brick tunnels and hollow rooms create strange echoes. The constant drip of condensation, the distant cry of seabirds, and the creak of old metal doors all blend into something that feels alive. Add the knowledge of what happened there, and your mind fills in the rest. There's one chilling legend passed down by former caretakers. In the 1950s, before the site was restored, a caretaker lived alone in a small apartment inside the fort. He often reported hearing someone pacing the upper levels late at night. Thinking it was trespassers, he'd go up with a lantern, but he never found anyone. Once, while locking up, he claimed he heard a man whisper, "We're still here." He never stayed overnight again. Despite all this, the fort doesn't feel purely frightening. There's also a deep sadness to it, like the place itself wants to be remembered. The soldiers imprisoned there, most of them young men, wrote letters home that still survive, talking about missing their families, praying for freedom, or even feeling grateful for small acts of kindness from guards. Some of those words are engraved on displays in the fort today, giving a human voice to what would otherwise just be a pile of stone. When I walked through Fort Delaware myself, what struck me most wasn't the coldness or the ghosts, it was the silence. Once the ferry leaves you on the island, you realize how isolated it is. The only sounds are the wind through the marsh grass and the distant rush of water. Inside the fort, the rooms are dimly lit, with moss creeping over the walls. You can almost picture the prisoners lying in those cramped bunks, listening to the same wind outside, counting the days. Today, Fort Delaware is a state park, restored with care. Guides in period clothing recreate daily life from the Civil War era, cooking food, firing cannons, and telling stories about soldiers on both sides. It's educational, even charming at times. Families visit, school groups take tours, and the ferry ride adds a bit of adventure. But even in daylight, the fort still carries that weight. You feel it when you step through the old Sally Port, the tunnel-like entrance that swallows the sound of the outside world. At night, the mood changes completely. The park occasionally offers ghost tours, where visitors walk through the darkened corridors with flashlights while guides recount the fort's eerie history. People laugh nervously at first, but as the night deepens, that laughter fades. The air feels colder in certain spots, especially near the old prison block. Sometimes, even skeptics admit they feel watched. There are positive sides to how Fort Delaware is treated today. It's well preserved, the ferry is well run, and the staff have kept the balance between history and mystery. They don't sensationalize it too much. The fort stands as both a war memorial and a haunted relic, depending on how you look at it. The negatives are mostly environmental. The island floods easily, and humidity continues to wear down the stone. Some visitors also find it a bit too commercialized, especially when the ghost tours get theatrical. But overall, it's one of the few places where history and legend still share the same ground naturally. Personally, I'm not sure what to believe about the hauntings. Standing there, I didn't see anything unusual, but I did feel something, a quiet pressure, like the air holding its breath. Maybe that's what people mistake for ghosts. Or maybe, after all the suffering that happened there, it's only natural that some trace of it remains. Either way, Fort Delaware doesn't need proof to feel haunted. The past itself is enough. These days, the fort remains open seasonally, drawing thousands of visitors each year. The ferry runs from April through October, bringing families, historians, and yes, ghost hunters. On calm days, the view of the Delaware River is beautiful, sunlight glinting off the water, herons stalking the shallows, the fort rising like a memory out of time. But when fog rolls in and the ferry horn echoes through the mist, the place reverts to what it's always been: lonely, mysterious, and haunted by its own history,